From Unity Church of Christianity in Houston, Texas, this is The Awakened Life with Reverend Howard Caesar. Unity is a non-denominational Christian church providing a positive, practical, and progressive approach to Christianity. Let's join the service in progress with the Reverend Howard Caesar.
I want to begin today by telling you about a story about a little girl. She came home from school and she said to her mother, "Mommy, today in school, I was punished for something I didn't do." The mother goes, "Really? That's terrible. I'm going to go talk to your teacher about that. What was it that you didn't do?" "My homework." So, I'm following that up by saying, we have some spiritual homework to do. That's why we're here. We have a divine appointment. We've come into this world. We've come into this life. We have some work to do so that we continue to broaden and expand who we really are. God does not punish us. We basically have the laws of consciousness that punish us if we're punished at all. And that is when we fail to see the infinite truth of who we really are and move into living from that space. And so when it comes to living this life, I believe that, and the desire to live a more expanded life, we're kind of moving in and out of that at times, into higher states and then kind of back to normal states. And we're moving either toward or away from that dynamic. There was a young man that came to see me a few years ago, actually, in ministry, and he was sharing with me his experience that he had of broadening his perception of life. And he said that he had always gone along in life pretty much functioning on the idea that this was life. That was the way he did it. He put his hands together, that this was life, very narrow. And he said then he began to grow spiritually, and he became much more aware and awake. He took some classes, took some workshops, discovered more of who he was, and began to wake up, if you will, to the idea, as he said, through meditation and processes and what have you. He found a dimension of himself that he said, grasped the idea that this was life, not this, okay? And that this was something that he was moving. He said that this had occurred basically around 2 years prior to his coming in and sharing, and that this vision and this feeling and this sense of the infiniteness of the divine and how little we are experiencing. And so he said now he knows it's there, but he isn't always necessarily in it. He knows that about himself, but he doesn't beat himself up for it, because he understands that the part of life is lots of things are moving through one's consciousness. But he said the big thing was that he became willing to look at what it is that takes him away from or out of harmony in his life, what it is that will upset him or irritate him, or the issues that he may have, a willingness to face his stuff, as he said, and kind of the runaway illusions that we have about life, and to let go of holding on to all of the things that separate us in consciousness from this great expanse. Now, surely you've heard the expression, "Let's face it." let's face it, and it's usually a preface to something that somebody is going to share. They may be having a conversation, there may be a problem that they're having, or there's something they're trying to figure out. It may be having to do with a situation or a set of circumstances, and one of them says to the other, "Let's face it, all we can do is this, or let's face it, this is the way it is. Let's face it, our only alternative is this, let's face it, these are the facts. Let's face it." And it's usually followed by something unpleasant that we have to face. And often something we have to give up, or a kind of inner defeat, or what have you. But today I'd like those words, "let's face it," to represent a couple other thoughts, and in a couple other ways. And one would be to think of, let's face it, in terms of what is very positive and what is very much the truth. Let's face our spiritual truth. Let's look in the face of what is the spiritual truth of who we are and this life. So let's face it. We are individualized expressions of a loving God, a presence that is everywhere, infinite. Let's face it, that Spirit is in us, and it knows who we are more than we do. Let's face it, the nature of that Spirit is love and power and compassion and goodness, and that too is inherently in us. Let's face it. Let's face it, that we are co-creators with this divine Spirit, which has the capacity to create anew one's whole life, really. At any moment can have an about-face and a turn, overcome obstacles, transform situations. Let's face it, Let's face it, if we will know the truth, that truth will set us free. Let's face it. Let's face it. Now, there's another part of this, let's face it, that I'd like to share as well. That's important, I think. And that is the willingness to face what it is that we must let go of, okay? What it is that we must release. Because part of accepting the truth that would set us free is also letting go of what is not the truth, okay? And much of the process of transformation always is really about letting go and clearing. Okay? Much of it is about oftentimes unlearning things that we've latched onto, concepts and ideas that are not accurate or true about us. We can call them lies, if you will, as the other side of what is truth. We can call them untruths. We can call them illusions, misperceptions, misunderstandings. But we all have a variety of them going on. And in order to let go of them, we have to notice that they are there, And that means we have to face these things that we have held on to, sometimes for years and years even, and carried in our consciousness and allowed them to beat us up, There's a wonderful story that Emmett Fox, some of you are familiar with the name Emmett Fox. He was a tremendous author, speaker, metaphysician of New Thought, and he is no longer with us and hasn't been for some years, but in his writings, he tells of an anecdote that he came across and read, actually, regarding a group of hunters that were out in the woods, and they had set up camp, and all of a sudden along comes a bear out of the woods into the camp, and as soon as they saw it, they all ran and headed for the woods, and they kind of hid a distance a ways off, and the campfire that they had there was unattended, and so there was a kettle of water boiling there, and apparently the bear was kind of interested in the kettle because the lid was dancing from the steam coming through it. And so the bear took a hold of it, this kettle, and naturally it burnt the bear. But instead of dropping it, he proceeded to hug it tightly, more tightly. And then, of course, that burned him some more, and the more it burned him, the more he held it tighter, because that's the defense mechanism of a bear, to hug it tightly. And so it was this vicious circle of ongoing pain for the bear. And Emmett Fox used that story as an illustration of the way many people amplify their difficulties. They sort of hug them to their bosoms by, constantly rehearsing them, constantly telling to themselves and others the same stories and painful stories, or dwelling on them, and instead of dropping them once and for all, so finally the wounding can begin to heal. And that's so important. And so there are lots of things that we hold tightly and that continue to burn us, or keep alive a certain amount of pain and suffering in our lives that we really need to let go of. And we all have certain ideas and concepts and beliefs, and these are about ourselves, about life, about others, about God, and all the many things that we've been conditioned into, really, in living in the world. And so, most of us have all gone to school, we've been educated, but we really aren't taught things like techniques for self-healing. And we aren't taught the laws of consciousness, and we aren't taught how to best use the mind in the most empowering way, and how to avoid negative programming and all of these kinds of things. We weren't given that kind of directions and guidance in school. It's kind of like, I like to think of a guy who went and bought a lawnmower. Might have been Home Depot, I don't know where. And he brings the lawnmower home, and he's got to assemble it. And so He lays out all the parts, and he's got the wheels and the handle and all of these things that he has to kind of put together. The problem is in the box, the directions are not for a lawnmower, it's for a wheelbarrow. And so you can work a long time trying to put a lawnmower together with instructions for a wheelbarrow and become very frustrated. And so all the parts are there. It's all put together there properly if you knew and had the right directions. So we don't have a chance, really, of assembling and putting this together until we're willing, really, to let go of those instructions and maybe move intuitively or get a new set of instructions. And we may have to say, let's face it, these instructions are not going to work. I'm going to have to lay them aside and have to open up to finding another way. And so in life, we've all been given a set of tools. We've been given all the parts provided by God. It's all inside of us. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. So the kingdom we all seek already exists within us, okay? We don't have to go searching all over. But along the path, along the journey of life, we received some faulty instructions. We just did. We have to sort that out. We may have wondered if we were a wheelbarrow or a lawnmower. And I'm here to tell you, you're a lawnmower. We all want to be a lawnmower, I think, because we want to be able to mow through the difficulties of life and cut through all the things that are negative and untrue. But unfortunately, many a person has kind of drifted into the realm of being a wheelbarrow and carrying around the weight of all the false information that they have garnered and been conditioned into through life. Now, the old hurts, the old wounds, the old charges that are from our past, they're still, carrying around. And it is keeping them from peace, love, and joy as it is their nature to be. Because all we bump up against, people, is ourselves, okay? That's all. Know thyself. And the part of you that is not your true self, you need to let go. So much of life in the path to fulfillment is that. Needs to be unloaded, let go. And we have to realize that before we can let go of something, we have to be able to face what it is that we may not have been willing to face. What it is that we've been running from, perhaps sometimes a long time, what it is we've pushed down and repressed or suppressed, our fears, what have you. There's that wonderful story in the book of Genesis that is about Jacob and Esau, and it really is a great example of some of what we're talking about here. Esau was the older brother. They were born as like twins, but Esau came out first, so the eldest, according to sacred tradition, receives the father's blessing. And there's a lot that goes along with that. It's very important. And so Esau very much wanted that father's blessing that he was entitled to. Jacob wanted it, however, as well. And so because the father was blind, didn't see well, Jacob was able to trick his father into giving him the father's blessings. Well, when Esau found out about it, Esau was furious, angry. He sought to kill his brother Jacob. But before he could, his mother, the mother, Rebekah, told Jacob, and Jacob fled for his life. And so years passed, and Jacob went to another land, and there he had wives and children and herds and all of these things. And at some point, God came to him and said, you must return to your homeland. You must return. But he was so worried that what he had done, and he had carried all this sense of this separation from his brother. And on the way to this experience with his brother, he had a dream, sleeping. And in the dream, he wrestled with an angel. And the wrestling part really represents this idea of wrestling with your higher and lower self. It's where he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And essentially, there is the part of us that wrestles in conflict with kind of a lower self and a higher self, and the higher is trying to call us into the truth of who we are. And ultimately, we have to come and embrace that and be blessed by it and have the strength of it that moves us forward. And that's essentially what happened. He wrestled with him until he was blessed. It gave him the strength to go forward and to meet his brother. And so the passage goes and continues, and it goes like this. And Jacob lifted up his eyes. This is Jacob who's now returning to see Esau, who he is afraid it's still going to take his life possibly. Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. Doesn't sound too promising. And Jacob went out ahead of his family and his herds, bowing himself to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, fell on his neck, kissed him, and they wept. It's a great line, powerful line, if you can imagine. 2 brothers. It is so likened to the parable of the prodigal son, when the father had his son come home. Remember, God was sending Jacob back to his homeland. And really what he's talking about is the homeland is the heart. The homeland is that connection. All these years, the brothers had been separated. All those years, they had missed all those times together, all the love that could have been shared. Why? Because there was a fear. There was something that they didn't want to be faced. And Jacob was driven distance because of it. And so it's a great, great story about how the God within us all is always telling us to return home to the homeland. And really the homeland is the heart. The homeland is back to love. Love will always win out. Love always casts out darkness. Love always casts out our fears. Okay? But we have to be bold and courageous enough to face whatever it is we bump up against. That is the fear that stands in the way of us being who we really are and we're created to be. That other larger self than we are, as opposed to the smaller self that seems to rule us so often and in so many ways. So it takes courage and honesty, self-honesty. An important step is to acknowledge that we have negative emotions, we have negative feelings. That's part of the human experience. It doesn't make you awful. We just don't need to identify with them. Let them be there, experience them, and move on. You see, we can't run from them. When we run from them, we expand them. We broaden them in us. If we repress and suppress, it's like be with whatever comes up. Experience. Life is experience, so experience it all. Don't run from something. It gives it power. You see, that resistance. What you resist persists. And so we all have a small self, and it's simply an aspect of the mind that is separate from who we truly are. And that's where we are right now in consciousness. Doesn't mean that's the truth of us, but right now where we are, we have this separate self that has been conditioned into us and into the framework of our consciousness. And we live much of our lives from this small self, even though this greater, larger Christ self is the truth of who we are. And so the smaller self is always made up of fears. It'll always want to retreat. It'll always want to escape. And interspersed within those fears, there are periods, of course, of happiness and peace and well-being and fulfillment, but they typically can be brief because we always have those fears that we haven't really faced right on the sideline waiting for us again. And so we fear those negative emotions because we really don't know what to do. We don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to handle them. We judge them, we condemn them. We condemn ourselves for having them, and we can't do that. That's no way to face. The only way past them is through them. There was a lady in our church, the first church, my first ministry. It was in Olympia, Washington, and she had a unique condition that really relates to your mind-body relationship. She had a condition where her head and neck was pulling and turning. So when she moved there to Olympia, I never knew her as anything other than when she'd talk to you, it was like this. And so her head kept turning more this way, and she couldn't straighten it. And I didn't know, I thought that's maybe she had some condition, always been that way or whatever. I never asked, I was polite about it. But she eventually came and shared, and she had gone to a doctor, and they couldn't find anything, and her doctor, and she went to the University of Washington, was checked out, they couldn't find anything. She went to the Virginia Mason Clinic, they couldn't find anything. And so it was continuing to get worse, and it was difficult for her to drive a car, shop, just enjoy life. And so she was in great despair. So the doctor that she was seeing eventually suggested that she go to this psychologist physician that he highly thought of. And so she went to that doctor, and he sat her down and began to ask a bunch of questions about when this began and what was going on in her life, and then and now and so forth. And it was brought out that it had begun while she was having great difficulty facing a divorce that her husband had wanted, asked for, and she had not wanted it or asked for it. It kind of blindsided her. And it left her in a difficult position. She had moved to Washington not too long before that. She had a business that she operated herself, and she had no reserve money, and it hurt, and it was embarrassing as well. But the doctor took her through this process of just relaxing and actually feeling all the feelings, all the pain that she had pushed away, and just able to face the problem. And she also had him give her affirmations that she could face anything now. She had the strength within to begin to identify with that larger self in her. And she came back just on a high because she was now able to again turn her neck and straight. She went back for a couple more treatments and it was fine. The remaining 6 years that I was there in that ministry, the condition never came back. But a big part of that treatment was the awareness that she was not willing to face something. She was not willing to face a part of her life. And now she was making that decision to go there. And she had basically said that prior to that, she knew she had buried a lot around it, and that it had basically been such that she was afraid it would overwhelm her if she went there, that it would do her in. And that's almost the fear we all have. It's all about survival. On an unconscious level, we're trying to survive, not only physically, but psychologically. And so physically, we don't jump off cliffs. Psychologically, we don't go towards our pain. But the truth is, we have to look at it to see what it might be wanting to tell us, okay? And that's important. And sometimes we need help through that process. And realize that, that thoughts, in and of themselves, are painless. You know, it is really the feeling. It is the feeling of the negative emotions underneath those thoughts where the pain is. And the discomfort and the suffering exists. It's not the thought that is the suffering. The thought may trigger a feeling, but it's the feelings, the negative feelings that we have. So letting go is a process, okay? And it involves being aware of a feeling. It just is letting it come up. It is staying with it, not pushing it away, letting it run its course without doing anything about it. It's just letting it be there, you know. It lets the energy out. It dissipates the energy. The energy empties out, and you're able to go on from there. Our resistance is what prolongs it. And so when in the letting go process, it's good actually even to ignore all thoughts that focus, to ignore all thoughts and focus on the feeling, and then let the feeling speak to you in terms of what thoughts are behind it, or ideas, or beliefs. You know, it's all about survival. And the real you, really, the real you that is that is aware of and witnessing these feelings, is the you that is spoken of as being in the world but not of it. In other words, it's like the witness, and you're witnessing being in the world, but you're not of those things. So feelings may come up, and you'll feel them, and you will basically say, but that's not who I am. That's an experience I'm now having. And it will soon be over. It will soon dissipate, and I'll be free. If I run from it, I allow it to grow, and it follows me everywhere. Okay? And that's the nature of it. So the more you observe or witness and allow feelings to be felt and dissipate without identifying with them, then the more you progressively move closer to living and moving and having your being in the real self that you are, the closer you move that direction. So letting go of these negative feelings is the undoing of the small self, the undoing of the ego, the separate self that we have created. And we're letting go of programs that we've created, that the mind has created, that has made us a slave to, and has blinded us to a life that is this. But that mind sometimes makes us look at the world like this, because we've become so overprotective of ourselves and so afraid to experience, because we think that that's who we are, those things. And everyone has feelings of all kinds, good and bad, flow through. You just don't have to identify them. Feel the feeling and let it move on. So the real self is found actually and experienced in the quiet space between thoughts, in a sort of field of silent awareness that is beneath our thoughts. And there's been some studies that have been done that indicate one's self-awareness is actually increased much more rapidly by observing feelings rather than observing the thoughts. Thoughts are important, don't want to put that down. Thoughts are things, they have energy, all of that. But there are some studies that say, really focus on and have awareness of what the feelings are that are going through you and say, what's that about? What's that about? And let it be felt. And it might take you to an awareness of a thought that you have that you don't want anymore. Those are directions and instructions you want to crumple up and toss, because that's not you see? Life is for growing through, not just going through. And so the Spirit of God in us says, let's face it. Let's face it, okay? There are things that we need to face. Let's not run from it. I have placed in you a larger self that is equipped to handle anything that may come up in your experience, including feelings that might frighten you. But we can move through them. There is, the mention of Jesus' lost years, and in which we aren't too sure what was going on and what happened. And we know, for one thing, he was not in a holding pattern. Because when the scripture picks up again, when his life appears after that window, it states he increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Wouldn't we all want to continue on the path that is increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and humanity? That's what it's all about. So love brings up anything unlike itself. Love brings up anything unlike itself. That's the nature of love and God, to heal us, you see. And as we become healed, the world becomes healed. All feelings fully felt lead to the feeling of love. Now we know God is love. We know God and love casts out fear. So I leave you with the profound and powerful knowing that we are here to let go and let God take you, me, us into love. God bless you all.
Thank you for joining us for today's message. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday. At Unity, we believe that God's presence of love and goodness is everywhere, and that life is meant to be good. You can find out more about Unity and our teachings at unityhouston.org.
Are you currently church shopping, looking for that right church for you or your family? Perhaps you've been looking and been turned off by organized religion. It happens. Let me suggest you try Unity Church. We are a positive, practical, progressive approach to Christianity. Many who have found us have said, I didn't know there was a church that taught what I always believed. Let's be honest, people shop for clothes, good restaurants, and the right church that feeds them spiritually. If you're seeking a spiritual truth beyond tradition, try Unity Church. Come join us.